In first to yesterday's Australia Day celebrations. Now, if you had the ABC on, you would have witnessed how much airtime it gave to the push to change the date.
Some Australians believe that we won't be celebrating this day on this date for much longer.
There's a huge shift going on in our culture at the moment.
It's definitely going to change, but it shouldn't.
Maybe not in my lifetime, hopefully my children's lifetime.
It's overwhelming to see the change in our country. I think the tides have turned.
A shifting sentiment for the next generation of Australians.
In the lead up to Australia Day, the ABC also published an article on how people could choose to boycott the holiday and work instead. And ABC Q&A host Stan Grant wrote in another article, quote, "This Evasion Day, I'm as far from Australia as I can get without leaving the country." And ABC Southeast Asia correspondent Avani Diaz tweeted, "Today is Republic Day in India, when people celebrate independence from British rule. Today in Australia, people celebrate the day the country was colonised, the only nation in the world that celebrates colonisation as its national day." ABC Arts even promoted an activist video. Now, be warned, the contents of this video are quite graphic.
This is Australia. Look how I'm killing ya. Locking your children up. Filling my prisons up. Yo, man, they want us all in the lockup. Or getting shot by that copper. And you mother owe us.
Now, I don't have strong opinions on when we should celebrate Australia Day, but I do think it's important that we have a day whenever it may be. But for a state-funded media organisation to be clearly picking a side in this incredibly divisive debate, it is not appropriate. ABC journalists need to be objective onlookers, not protesters. And that includes your choice of guest. In this case, Professor Marcia Langton, the co-author of the Indigenous Voice co-design process, was put on air by the ABC to talk about the need for re-education initiatives for our children.
I don't think most Australians know much about the frontier histories. It's certainly not taught in schools. In fact, it's in most schools, it's banned. We need to change our school curriculum. We need to educate Australians about the factual history of Australia, and we need to stop the lying.
There is no truth to the claim that most schools ban the teaching of frontier histories. No pushback from the ABC on those extreme suggestions, though. Instead, the lobbying to change the date continued. Here is ABC Melbourne host Ali Moore asking leading questions to a pub owner who cancelled an Australia Day gig at his establishment.
You know, just from our business perspective, we've just decided to not run entertainment. You know, you can still come into the pub and have a beer and grab a palmy and catch up with your mates, but it's just not going to be a big raging party.
Or indeed, you can go somewhere else. I'm surprised. I mean, are you surprised at the fact that people have got grumpy?
To be honest, Ali, no, I'm not surprised. I'm fairly aware of the climate in Australia and how mixed people are on this issue. And
Proof the publican, unlike the ABC presenter, is accustomed to people with differing views. As for the so-called Invasion Day protests in Sydney, the ABC's Carly Williams couldn't contain her enthusiasm.
Carly, what's the mood like on the ground where you are? What's happening?
Sally, the mood is peaceful. We've had beautiful music.
You might say the protests were typical of the inner CBD demographic.
Is the upcoming referendum being discussed today?
It is, Sally. The Voice to Parliament is on the agenda. Protesters are raising awareness around racial injustices, including the rising number of black deaths in custody and police mistreatment, land rights, climate change. People are opposing land clearing, oil and gas mining and water rights.
Well, that covers just about everything, of course, except for this one vitally relevant Indigenous issue.
Carly, all of this is happening in the context of the current issues in Alice Springs. How much is that on the agenda at the moment?
There hasn't been too much spoken about Alice Springs and the so-called Stronger Futures bans that lapsed in the Northern Territory's remote and regional communities last July.
Well, let's bring in tonight's panel, and I'm pleased to say I'm joined by YouTuber and commentator Daisy Cousins and Sky News contributor Joe Hildebrand. Joe, thank you for joining us on the desk. Obviously, it's definitely a story that should be covered. It's a topic that's quite divisive. I don't know about the role that journalists should play into it in terms of a point of advocacy. What's your opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's obviously an element of that, and I think there is. I've taken the view recently that I always declare my interests, I declare my political sympathies, because I think the media is now obviously so partisan and it breaks along sort of ideological lines a lot, and you might as well just be upfront about it. And I think the problem with the ABC is that we all know that it hangs very much to the left, but it feigns objectivity and feigns complete impartiality, and most people don't buy it, but the huge number of people who actually watch it think, oh my God, this is the truth. This is what everyone thinks. Now, the truth is, it is not what everyone thinks. The truth is, and again, I'm not wedded to Australia Day as you are. I think there should be 2 days, the 25th and the 26th. Throw in the 27th, I'm a happier man. But the idea that the vast majority of Australians oppose Australia Day is a lie. It is a fallacy. Polling has come out. It's not even shifting. The polling that's come out shows that 2/3 of people, almost 64%, I think it was, favour keeping the day on January 26th. That is the exact same number as it was last year. So the idea that there is this growing groundswell is just not true. So to present it as a sort of fait accompli, and if you're still, if you're still celebrating Australia Day on January 26th, you're on the wrong side of history, and that this is inevitable. That is not happening. The only number that is moving, I'm very sorry to say, is support for The Voice, which is going down because it is being conflated with this issue. So you've got something that is really practical and really positive, which is a voice to Parliament, which could actually make a real difference in people's lives. And then you've got something that is entirely symbolic, which is a question of what day we circle on a calendar. And the one that gets all the attention, all the noise, all the protests, all the advocacy is the one that makes no bloody difference whatsoever, will make no bloody difference to the people who are suffering in Alice Springs. And the one thing that we should actually be supporting that has majority support is being cut loose, hanging in the wind, and indeed opposed by some of the radicals who are all on about Invasion Day. Lydia Thorpe, I'm talking to you. Yep. And causing huge damage and actually undermining it to the point where I'm fearful that it could actually fail because of these crazy radicals who would much rather have a symbolic gesture, which will make no difference whatsoever, than a practical difference that could actually improve people's lives.
Yeah, we'll get to that because there's much more I want to say on that as well. But Daisy Cousins, let's bring you in. What did you think of the media coverage?
Well, it was just so completely typical, and it's what the ABC seems to do every year. They present just one side of the Australia Day debate. And the thing is, Jack, that's perfectly fine for them to do that. I mean, that certainly is a perspective on Australia Day. There, people are perfectly entitled to that opinion, and it's interesting that the ABC covers it. But the problem is they have an obligation to the public to also cover the other side. I mean, why do we get no opinion pieces on why it's great that Australia Day is on January 26th? Why do we get nothing on, positive, Australia Day parties, etc., etc.? It's always this kind of negative stuff. And it would not be hard for them, Jack, to find someone who would write a column supporting Australia Day. As Joe pointed out, most people are actually happy with the day that it is. So look, ABC journalists, you want to have your little kind of Invasion Day ideological party, that's fine. God bless you, God love you, do that. You're entitled to your opinion. But for God's sake, fulfill your obligation to the public and present the other side of the story as well. It is not hard.
Yeah, I mean, as a young journalist, I would spend a lot of time on Australia Days at citizenship ceremonies for immigrants that are just so glad to be here. And I do think it's a bit sad that the focus is away from that.